It's time once again for another edition of Facing the Issues. We've heard a lot about dengue fever, chikungunya fever, yellow fever, West Nile fever. Zika is the name that is making the rounds nowadays. And of course, the number of measures have been also taken over the years to ensure that members of the public, the residents of the country, visitors, are not associated in one way or the other by getting infected. And these illnesses, if you may call them that, chikungunya, yellow fever, Zika now, all associated with a tiny mosquito called the Aedes aegypti mosquito. On tonight's program of Facing the Issues, we are very glad to have with us Richard Adey, who is the regional manager for the Caribbean, based with OXITEC. It's a UK-based company. Richard, we want to thank you very much for taking time out of your schedule to talk to us here about the Zika and Aedes aegypti mosquito, and our topic is basically about genetically modified mosquito.
Well, thanks very much indeed for inviting me to speak today on your program. I would happily give you an oversight of anything you'd like to know about our company and about the state of this technique and what we think can be achieved here in Anguilla.
When was OXITEC formed and what led to the formation?
Okay, the company OXITEC was formed way back in 2002. At that time, within Oxford University, there was a line of research that was coming out of the Department of Zoology in insect genetics and molecular biology. And basically, it was foreseen at those very early days that this could be a very, very useful application for public health. And so the university split off OXITEC as a startup company in order that it could get access to financing in order to develop this for operational usage. And so since 2002, OXITEC has been a company, and we've been developing this technique that involves a lot of laboratory investigations, that involves what we call contained work, where these mosquitoes are looked at basically in cages to see how effective they are. And then since 2009, a series of field trials to prove in various countries how effective and how safe the technology is.
Now, you are currently in Anguilla. Were you invited here by government or private sector organization? Why are you in Anguilla at this time?
Oh, we're here to discuss with the government. We have an ongoing dialogue actually. We discuss with numerous health ministries in the region. We usually make our technology known through scientific conferences and symposia and so on in the region. And we offer governments to come and discuss in further depth. So the government of Anguilla was very pleased to have that opportunity. So we'll be discussing with them during my visit here. Some discussions have already taken place and some will take place.
You are the regional manager for the Caribbean. How long have you been in that position?
I've been with OXITEC for around 8 years and regional manager for the Caribbean for around half of that time.
Now, we talk about genetically modified mosquitoes. First up, there's a myth, I call it a myth, that these genetically modified mosquitoes that we hear about, and we want to go a little bit more in depth as to how is the method used. Is it responsible for the Zika virus?
Well, don't believe everything you read, I would say. We're aware of this misinformation that is spread out through a blog, basically. That has been answered independently by world-renowned scientists, and that idea has actually been put to rest, we hope. Mainstream, respected scientific authority has totally quashed that as any sort of credible piece of information.
Your website talks about the genetically modified mosquito. OXITEC scientists, it says, have to find a way of incorporating the new gene into the mosquito's own DNA, from where it will all be copied into every cell of the mosquito body. And the process begins with the mosquito eggs. Can you go on from that?
Sure. So it all sounds more complicated than it actually is. The principles of it are quite easy. So there are two things. How do you genetically modify the mosquito? And the second thing is, well, what do you do with it, and how do you use that as the basis for control? So first of all, how do you modify the mosquito? And we call them OXITEC mosquitoes, or in Brazil they're called actually friendly mosquitoes there by the government and the people. They're exactly the same as an ordinary wild Aedes aegypti mosquito, apart from two very minor changes, and these are two genes that have been inserted into the mosquito. And one of these genes has the effect that the next generation of the mosquito doesn't develop to adulthood. So this is one gene. This is the gene that actually is responsible for the population control, which I'll come on to in a moment. And the second gene is a marker gene, and that just tells us which when one catches an Aedes aegypti mosquito, is it in fact an OXITEC one or is it a wild one? So it's a very good way of following the development of a control program and gives you an excellent opportunity to sort of trace and track the success of the program very accurately.
Are the mosquitoes look alike? I mean, when you finish the genetically modified mosquito, it's a male, I understand, and the female of the Aedes aegypti mosquito is the one that spreads or bites you and spreads the disease. They look alike? What's the difference?
Well, actually, there's no difference at all that one can tell, and they not only do they look alike, I mean, behave in exactly the same way. For all intents and purposes, everything is the same apart from these two genes. And in the mosquito there are very, very, very many genes, thousands of genes which regulate the mosquito's behavior, how it looks, etc., etc. So these are just two genes, a very, very precise change in order to change two things. And I mentioned the marker gene. That is a way of telling which is an OXITEC mosquito. So if one looks at the larvae under a specific light of a specific wavelength, you can see that the larvae is fluoresces. You can see a red color. Now that's a gene that was actually taken from a marine coral, and that is widely used as a marker gene. So one can tell the difference under a particular light, but otherwise in every other respect they're the same. Of course, apart from this gene that I was telling you about that causes the next generation not to develop. Now, if we imagine an island such as Anguilla, where there is a population of Aedes aegypti mosquitoes, that will consist, the wild population will consist of male and female of those species. Now, our method really is a type of birth control for mosquitoes. If you can imagine that what we're trying to do is to release male mosquitoes, OXITEC mosquitoes, into the environment in such numbers that they're present at any one time in significant numbers, at least equal to the numbers of the wild males that are out there. So we're releasing significant numbers of these OXITEC male mosquitoes. Pointed out the males don't bite. They can't bite, in fact. They don't have the right mouth parts, and they don't need to suck blood like the female does. And they're incapable of transmitting any diseases. So what we're doing is we're releasing the OXITEC male mosquitoes, and they are competing then with those wild males in order to get at the females as mating partners. So they will mate with the females that are out in the population, in the environment, and those females will then lay eggs, but because those eggs have been fathered by one of our mosquitoes, that egg will never develop through to become an adult mosquito, which can bite and transmit disease. And so basically you've got these females being occupied with mating partners that are, functionally sterile. So that leads to a population crash.
All scientific wording there. I just hope our viewers were able to get to it. OXITEC scientists inject a very small amounts of DNA into these the mosquitoes.
Yeah.
And it says that many of the eggs injected in this way won't survive. What's the survival rate?
Oh, okay, that's the actual. The injection of DNA into the eggs is something that we don't need to do that anymore, because once that is done, and that's several years ago, once you've achieved the DNA, which is the genes, these two genes getting into the mosquito chromosome, then you don't need to inject anymore. You've done this transformation, and then you can breed from that your mosquitoes to use for operational programs. So the injection of the mosquito eggs was kind of something that was done in the lab, several years ago in order to create the OXITEC mosquito. So now we're just reproducing from those original transformed mosquitoes.
At any one time, how many male OXITEC mosquitoes would you send to the wild, as it were?
Oh, well, it depends how many are needed. We need to obviously release enough mosquitoes, otherwise you will not get the desired effect. Yeah. It's a little bit like asking, well, if a building is on fire, how much water do you need to put it out? Well, you need enough to do the job, but we will know always in any project if we're using enough, because that monitoring method that I told you about, the fact that these carrier marker gene, well, we can set up all over an island a monitoring system where we're looking at sampling the mosquito, the Aedes aegypti population, and we can look on quite a micro level what's happening to that population. Is it decreasing as we anticipate? Because this technique will go on for several months and will decrease the population of the Aedes aegypti mosquito. So with our monitoring traps, we can check if the population is going down, but we can also check, because of the fluorescent marker, we can also check if we're releasing enough.
What
basically.
has been the success rate of this method?
Oh well, every single field investigation that's been done, and there have been field trials done in the Cayman Islands, 3 in Brazil, 1 in Panama, a much smaller one in Malaysia, and now there's operational use in Brazil. Each of those field tests has shown over 90% reduction in the wild Aedes aegypti population. And that's, that level of control just is not achievable with other methods. And that is why dengue, last year chikungunya, and now Zika have proven very, very difficult to control, because the standard methods available are just not effective enough. They will have some impact on the Aedes aegypti population, but clearly not enough to stop the disease transmission. And this is this need for a more effective control method has been very well realized by all of those people involved in disease research, vector-borne controlled disease research. They realize that the available tools are just not good enough. And of course these diseases, dengue, chikungunya, Zika, there's no cure for them either.
The World Health Organization, WHO, at a meeting a couple of weeks ago, painted a big picture of the Zika thing in terms of what needs to be done, its effect on the Caribbean in particular, the islands where the disease is, infecting tourism and so on. But does the OXITEC genetically modified mosquito, does the method have the blessings of WHO, PAHO?
The WHO has been active in this field for years, very, very closely monitoring and facilitating the situation where genetically modified mosquitoes can be used. They have, they have their evaluation unit at the WHO in Geneva. They have looked very, very carefully at all of the field data and safety data that we've supplied to them, and they are satisfied on the completeness of that data and the effectiveness against Aedes aegypti. That is clear. And a quote that I just pulled from WHO last night was that WHO encourages affected countries and their partners to boost the use of current mosquito control interventions and to judiciously test the new approaches. And ours is one of those. So there is very much a support for countries not to sit back, but to go ahead and to evaluate these new tools.
Our guest tonight on tonight's Facing the Issue is Richard Adey, who is the Regional Manager for the Caribbean of OXITEC, and our topic is genetically modified mosquitoes. When we come back, we're going to look at the community engagement of this method. Back in a moment.
I'm tired of all the confusion, a different way to call everyone, so I say no way, just one flat red please. That's the only resolution for me. That is why we have line one red. Anytime, any network. Line talk so great. Tell everyone about line one red. All across the nation, we talking with line one red. Call family, call friends, call everyone. No matter their phone, all across the island.
Upgrade to the simple life. One handset, one rate, one network. Lime. Talk so great.
Line one red. All across the nation, we talking with line one red. Line one red.
Washing your hands is the best way to stop the spread of germs. Wash them before eating, preparing food, or taking care of a baby, and after coughing, sneezing, handling pets, or using the bathroom. Here's how to wash your hands. Wet hands with clean water. Apply soap. Rub hands together vigorously for 20 seconds, long enough to sing happy birthday. Pay special attention to the back of the hands, between the fingers, fingernails, fingertips, and thumbs. Rinse hands with clean running water. Air dry by shaking off excess water. Turn off the tap with paper towel or tissue. Dry hands with paper towel or tissue. Open the bathroom door with a paper towel and then dispose in a bin. You can also use hand sanitizers or wipes. Keep your hands clean to prevent the spread of germs.
A lot of people think that fast bikes are cool, and the girls sure like the guys who ride them. But like so many things about life, you gotta be careful. Having sex without a condom is like riding a bike without a helmet. It's just plain dumb. It's okay to have fun as long as you're smart about it. My name is Daniel the Lion Fortress, and I'm different, and I'm making a difference.
Live up. Love, protect, respect.
On this edition of Facing the Issues, our guest is Richard Adey, the Regional Manager for the Caribbean of OXITEC, and we're looking at genetically modified mosquitoes. Richard, what input will the people of Anguilla have, and what preparations will the people of Anguilla need to have in terms of community engagement if and when the government decides to go ahead, if it does, with this method of the genetically modified mosquito?
It's a good question. Community engagement is probably the single most important part of any project that involves the use of our mosquitoes. What community engagement aims to do is to inform every sector of the population about the technique and to listen to any concerns that they have and to address those concerns in a way that people understand, with the objective that they are fully informed. And what we find normally is that the enthusiasm for a project is very high indeed when that community engagement has been done properly. And I can tell you about the various methods that are used, but following a community engagement campaign that was undertaken in Brazil, in Piracicaba, where there's an operational project ongoing at the moment. That campaign was delivered by the health authority with support and involvement from OXITEC. After that community engagement campaign, I think an independent survey found around 93% support of residents in that area. So it's in everybody's interest, of course, that a project is fully supported or a very large majority of the people are fully behind the project, and that would be our aim. So how do we do that? As I say, this is something that's done really with the government in the lead, because the government would be communicating with its own people, but we would be supporting, and various methods to do that. So TV, radio, and
tell us some of the methods you want the government to use to ensure that there's community participation and engagement.
Yeah, things like town hall meetings, activities, educational activities in schools. Very often kids bring home messages to their parents. We'll have like information stands in the centre of town, door-to-door leafleting, door-to-door discussion, TV, radio, etc. So really a lot of different methods of communication have been used elsewhere, and as I say, we're also looking to specifically talk to different what we call stakeholder groups in as much detail that they want to have from us. So how a community engagement campaign would actually unfold here in Anguilla would basically be for the government to decide. But there's a lot of precedents from elsewhere, and we'd be able to advise what had worked very well.
The Aedes aegypti mosquito has been around in Anguilla for a while.
Yeah.
I don't know of any reports of any persons who've died as a result of any diseases from it. But how do you answer people, any person argue with her that, oh, we've had the Aedes and that we haven't had any deaths as a result of that, at least none reported. And now you're coming with genetically modified mosquitoes. I mean, how does it work? How do you be able to sell that message to the people of Anguilla that genetically modified mosquitoes will assist the country?
Well, I think the first part of your question is, well, why bother to do anything about Aedes aegypti? I think that your health department knows very well how problematic this mosquito species is. I don't know if any deaths have ever been attributed to Aedes aegypti in the recent past in Anguilla, but certainly it is responsible for deaths in the region. Dengue comes in waves, as you know, and the amount of dengue in the world is increasing year on year. It's actually now estimated to be 400 million cases a year of dengue fever, and the most serious forms, dengue hemorrhagic fever, can be fatal. Chikungunya was really seen as a wake-up call to the region that this mosquito is problematic. There's a lot of suffering involved as a result of chikungunya in the region, and I'm not sure that the response or that warning was heeded at the time. And now, just a short time later, we have Zika, and this, as you know, the various association with microcephaly, these babies being born with deformities and so on, has caused this actually to be stated to be a global crisis of global concern by the World Health Organization. And therefore, I think that Anguilla is following that concern, and the question is, what can be done about the mosquito? Now, this is the best option that's on the table, that's ready to go now. As I said, it's proven to decrease the Aedes aegypti mosquito population by over 90%. That is going to make a huge difference. We believe it's possible to completely eliminate this species of mosquito from Anguilla. It's not a native of Anguilla. It's what we call an invasive species. It's come in from elsewhere, basically. It's adapted to living in close proximity to humans. It's adapted to feeding mostly on human blood. It's adapted to breeding in man-made containers. This is a problematic mosquito species. It's not playing any natural part in the ecosystem here. If you can get rid of this mosquito, you should do it, and that was the aim many years ago during the yellow fever eradication campaign in South America and the Caribbean, was to get rid of this mosquito completely. There was a lot of success at that time, but that's a different era. One can no longer use DDT insecticides, etc. This is the best option for completely eliminating this species of mosquito, and I think it would, to Anguilla, it would bring a health leadership, an environmental leadership. We haven't talked about the environmental credentials of this.
Yeah, I'm coming to that because we've known that the traditional methods to control the Aedes aegypti mosquito can be harmful to people and the environment. The question I was going to come to you with is, how will the genetically modified mosquito be harmful to the environment and the people of the island?
Yeah, not at all. I mean, of course, safety and environmental safety are the two main concerns that everybody has. And regarding the environmental credentials, normally the way to try to control this type of mosquito is by informing the community, to clear up their backyards and so on, to stop there being breeding sites there, and to use a bit of repellent on themselves and so on. The other methods involve the use of insecticides and larvicides, and there is increasing resistance in the region and in the world to the use of insecticides, especially fogging, because of course people breathe in those fogs, and those fogs are indiscriminate in that they kill good insects as well as bad insects, and that is not very ecologically sound. So what we have here is a method. The OXITEC method is completely species specific, so it's only taking out Aedes aegypti, and it's doing so without leaving any environmental footprint. So the Aedes aegypti, the OXITEC Aedes aegypti, which are released into the environment, they don't stay in the environment. They last a couple of days, and then they'll die of old age. So we re-release more. Because we always want some OXITEC mosquitoes there available to mate with the females. So, but each of those males that we release, they will mate, but they'll die within a couple of days, 2 or 3 days normally. So they don't establish in the environment, and the next generation doesn't establish in the environment because of this lethal gene. So there's no ecological footprint there. So it's usually when environmentalists get to understand that, they come very much on board behind this technique.
You mentioned genes, even if it's not always clear what the genes are. And what they do, the gene is the name given to a section of DNA. What is meant by gene? What exactly is a gene, and what is meant by genetics?
Right. Well, a gene, genetics is the study of genes, and when we talk about DNA is the sort of generic term for all of the genes that are in an organism. Now, a gene is almost like a piece of computer code, actually. It's in the cells of everyone, and each gene controls a certain attribute of that person or that animal. So, it might control in an apple the size of the apple, the color of the apple. A human being, there may be genes that control eye color or the curliness of hair, for example. These are all genetically, and also, people's susceptibility to certain diseases also has a genetic basis. So you'll have people with a certain gene would be more immune to certain types of diseases, and people with a variation on that gene or an absence of that gene in the what we call dominance would be more susceptible to the disease. So it's really a kind of a blueprint. It's a kind of a code that's in everyone's genes, and that has the effect of really making a person or an organism, let's say, what it is. So the genes are everything, and a human basically has half of its genes from the mother and half from the father, and so do mosquitoes too.
Now, all this sounds pretty good, and the end result is what you're looking for to ensure that nobody dies. First of all, nobody's infected by chikungunya, yellow Nile, yellow fever, dengue fever, and the Zika. Well, this costs money. Mm-hmm. This exercise, this method costs money. Who pays for this?
Well, we in Anguilla, we're just starting to have those conversations with the government, regarding how this could be introduced in the most cost-effective and attractive way. As you can imagine, having spent so long on developing this technology, and it is an awful long time for a private company to keep plugging away at it and to get it right, and now here we are 14 years later. It's starting to be used operationally. It's in our interest, of course, to make it as affordable as we possibly can, because we want to see the benefits. Well, it wouldn't be correct of me to preempt a discussion with the government, and I think yes, you'll have to excuse me for
no problem.
Holding back on that.
This is facing the issues. Richard Daly, the regional manager of OXITEC in the Caribbean, is our guest. When we come back, we're going to ask him about the response from the region, because we've already heard that an island, Dominica, say it's a no-no for them. Let's hear Richard's response to that. This is facing the issues.
When life moves fast, you need something to keep up with you. That's why you need the MyLime app. Remember the days of lining up to top up your phone? Well, not anymore. Now you can top up to start talking the night away. How about those pesky bills for postpaid? If you'd like to look at your entire bill, press download. Do you have that friend that always spams you for phone credit? Let's send them some credit. Need to post your selfies online? How about getting a data bolt on? Using the MyLime app takes less than 10 seconds. Now go forth and text, WhatsApp, and watch videos. My life, my way, MyLime.
In case of an earthquake and the place that's shaking, drop, cover, and hold on. Drop, cover, and hold on. In case of an earthquake, here's a few tips that can keep you from harm. In case of an earthquake, you gotta stay calm. Move away from doors, windows, and things that can fall. Try not to use steps or elevators at all. Drop, protect your head on your face. Don't go running all over the place. Cover, under a bed or a table, against a wall that's firm and stable. Hold on, you must hold on. Don't panic, stay calm. Don't move until the shaking stops. Here it is. Drop, cover, and hold on. Drop, cover, and hold on. In case of an earthquake. Drop, cover, and hold on.
Learn how to protect yourself during an earthquake. Log on to weready.org. That's weready.org for more information.
The amount of salt you'll find in many prepared foods will shock you. Too much salt leads to high blood pressure, which in turn can cause heart attack and stroke. Canned meats, soups, chips, sauces, seasonings, all can have loads of salt. Always check the labels on products you buy. Avoid any item with more than 10% of the recommended daily amount. Control your blood pressure by lowering your salt intake. Salt, the silent killer. Cut down on salt.
This is facing the issues, and we're talking tonight about genetically modified mosquitoes. And our guest is Richard Adey, who is the regional manager for the Caribbean of OXITEC, a UK-based company. Richard, you're in the Caribbean, you're responsible for the Caribbean. How many regional islands have you visited? Who's responded to this method, and how's it going?
Well, there is a very large interest in our technique, more than ever, just over the past 2 or 3 months as the Zika crisis has unfolded. But having said that, we are in contact with most of the Caribbean health departments in some way or another, either in deep discussion or in some, we keep them updated. We've tried to visit most of the Caribbean health departments.
Now, Dominica has indicated, the authorities in Dominica have said no to this method. Have you visited there? Have you had discussions with them? Are you in a position to respond to this?
Well, we have not had any contact with Dominica or the health authorities in Dominica. That's one of the very few, in fact, or we haven't had any contact. So you know, on the back of those remarks that you've just made there, coming from Dominica, we're very interested to reach out to them and to talk to them and you know, understand what their concerns are, especially as there's no suggestion or proposal on the table for Dominica. Then you know, we need to understand what has prompted them to come out against the technique. But I think, yeah, that is definitely somebody where we'll be reaching out to talk to them.
Is your responsibility basically just for the English-speaking Caribbean, or?
That's correct. Yes. Yeah. Well, the English-speaking and you know, French and Dutch-speaking parts of the Caribbean.
As we look at this genetically modified mosquito and the method being used by OXITEC, and you're trying to sell it to the world, the region, the world, what time frames are we looking at?
For what exactly?
For positive results, if
I see.
if Anguilla.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's say you're meeting with the executive council folks tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
You've gone to several islands before. You've rolled out a time frame. I'm sure you've got at the back of your mind a time frame in which you'll want Anguilla to be on board if they're interested, including the whole question of community engagement. And from your end, you will have personnel, I'm sure, coming in to help the government of Anguilla. Run us through a time frame.
Sure. Well, when the decision, you know, when a decision is made, it would be nice if there is a positive decision made, of course, we'd be delighted. If that were the case, there's a certain setup time, because what we need to do is to produce the mosquitoes here locally. That will
be produced here?
Yeah, they'll be produced here. The mosquito eggs will come in and we'll produce the adults here locally. So we need to set things up, and that will take a few months, typically around 5 months. Now, during that period of time, the setup time, a couple of things which are critical. One of them is for us to set up quite a detailed monitoring system over the island, so that we're able, via what they call overtraps, a large number of overtraps over the island, we're able to see on quite a fine scale, a micro scale, what's happening to the Aedes aegypti population locally. So we'll be setting that up. We'll be training people from the health department who'd be working with us, and we'd also be undertaking community engagement. Now, community engagement, we touched on it before. Yeah, that's quite an intensive campaign of information and discussion, and that usually goes on for a period of 2 months, immediately prior to the first releases of the mosquitoes. And for that campaign, as I said, we've got a lot of experience and input where we can support obviously the Ministry of Health in that, and we would have here at the appropriate times for the community engagement campaign, you know, at least 2 or 3 people.
We hear a lot about pest control. The mosquito could be a pest, depending on how you look at it. We've got other things in the island to worry about other than the mosquitoes, other pests. Will they be harmed by this method? No,
this is, as I say, this is a species-specific technique just for this one species of mosquito. And that one species of mosquito is really the troublesome one. So that's, we don't tend to use the wording pest control for what we're doing, because if it's a health intervention, it's called vector control, and a vector is a vector is something that transmits a disease, actually. So this is professional or government vector control program. So we'll be working you know, side by side with people from the vector control department of the government to implement this program. And after the setup time that we talked about just a minute ago, we'd be looking then at, you know, the operations, and we would anticipate that within a period of 18 months we had, if not completely eliminated this species, then got very, very close to it, and certainly close enough, we anticipate, to stop any disease transmission.
One of the areas that is being affected by the Aedes aegypti mosquito is the tourism industry. Anguilla tends a lot on tourism in the region. The current head of the OECS and the Prime Minister of Grenada, Zakib Mitchell, is already in the OECS islands, have looked at trying to let the people of Anguilla and the rest of the OECS need to know that I need to clean up the surroundings and so on.
Sure.
That's a health responsibility. But what else should be, as from where you stand, all mosquito related, what other message that you personally you think the health of personnel here in Anguilla should be getting to the people of Anguilla in preparation for your method if it is given the okay by the government?
Right.
Apart from cleaning up the place, and making sure there's...
Well, I think those existing advice that is standard advice to take care of where this mosquito is breeding. It'll breed in basically man-made containers, a bit of stagnant water.
Swamps and so on.
Yeah, more this species is associated with man, so it's never going to be breeding more than a couple of hundred yards away from where people are actually. So it's not a species that is breeding off, breeding in large swamp areas where there are no people. It likes clean water, and it usually likes it in a like an old bucket or a flower vase or something like this, things that you find around the home. Yeah? So that's a very important point. Now, alone, it doesn't seem to have the required impact, but it certainly would have some impact and be very supportive to what OXITEC is doing. So that type of message, we would anticipate, I'm sure that the health department are already giving those messages out, and that's the type of thing that needs to continue, and especially just before the start of our campaign, even intensify that sort of supportive measure, because it's very helpful indeed to the introduction of our technique.
How do you respond to folks out there who are, just don't care about the mosquito? I mean, the mosquito can bite you. We haven't had any disease. The authorities are now asking, like the hotel industry, to provide mosquito nets. Make sure you got repellent, for your visitors. Just to be more cautious in the approach. I mean, you're looking at destroying the Aedes aegypti mosquito, and you're looking for help from the health authorities in that regard. But bringing down your money earned at the tourism industry can be a no-no if these mosquitoes are not controlled.
Well, I think, is this a good idea or not to control Aedes aegypti, or just to leave it? Well, there already are efforts underway to control it. So I think, one has to defer.
But you think it's a successful defund to your oxidine? The other methods that have been...
Oh, I think your health department is probably doing, a very good job with the tools that are available. And, it is recognized, it is fully recognized throughout the region that the tools available just, are not good enough. So I think that the health department, your government, has already taken the decision that vector control is a good idea, and that is in line with, controlling Aedes aegypti. That's in line with every country in the Caribbean. There is no health department, I don't think, that has decided that it's a bad idea to control Aedes aegypti. So that's something where one has to defer to the professionals, really. And there is suffering due to dengue. There was a lot of suffering in the region due to chikungunya. Zika has caused unease, and has also caused unease from potential visitors. And I don't I don't fully know what the situation is here, but elsewhere in the region there have been certain numbers of cancellations and so on.
The
So
tourism industry. It has
exactly.
affected the region. Anguilla is no exception. Now you are going to be, your method, is going to be between the male and the female. Can the mosquito mutate to make your method less effective?
No, we've been following this for generations and generations and generations, because as I mentioned, once you have transformed the mosquito, you just keep breeding from it. So we check very, 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 very closely in our labs back at the UK if there's any change in that mosquito, if it's becoming in any way different from what we expected. If there's any loss of effectiveness or difference in the numbers of eggs it produces or anything, and it's not the case. But it's of course it's closely monitored.
Yeah. What are there international guidelines, or regulations for field trials of the GM mosquito, or can countries impose their own regulations?
Well, basically, GM organisms are regulated on a national level. So the situation is that each country has sovereignty over that issue, but they are regulated, which means that the government, any government who's interested to use GM organisms must take a decision based on technical facts and based on safety data that is supplied and what we call a risk assessment. So that is the basis for a national regulatory decision, and that's one of the things we'll be discussing in some depth with the government.
What about the potential effects of the oxy mosquito, say, on the ecosystem? Any?
No. Again, this is part of the process of approval, regulatory approval, is to examine through what they call a risk assessment the potential impact on humans, the potential impact on the environment. So each possible scenario that one can imagine is analysed in depth. What's the chances of this happen? Are there any? If it did happen, what are the mitigating actions that could be put in place, and what's the consequence? Every single regulatory authority that has examined these mosquitoes in detail has gone on to approve them. And in Brazil, where they have a lot of resources and expertise there on the regulation of GM organisms, their national biosafety unit approved our mosquitoes in record time, actually, and that they approved them for use throughout the country. So there've never been any safety or environmental concerns that have been upheld when these are looked into by experts. And basically, from the layman's perspective, just to answer your question about the environment and so on, what we're doing is we're taking an invasive species out of the environment. So invasive species are by definition bad. They don't have a place there. We're taking in basically a dangerous public health nuisance out, and nothing is relying on this mosquito as a food source, for example. Our mosquitoes are not establishing in the wild. They're a precision tool. If you stopped releasing them, they completely, all trace of them will disappear from the environment. So actually, the environmental case is very, very strong indeed, actually, and I do look forward to speaking in the future with environmentalists in depth about this topic. They're one of the groups of people that we'd like to specifically address during a communication campaign to make sure that they have understood, because they also will show their own leadership if they understand and support this technique.
Have you had any results as to whether or not the mosquitoes, the Aedes aegypti mosquitoes, develop any resistance to your method?
Nothing. This is of course monitored, but nothing. There's nothing. No data at all to say that is.
You indicated earlier that the genetically modified mosquito will be done here in Anguilla. Okay, what's the venue? What is it? Just an open house?
No, it's what we would do. So as I say, the genetically modified mosquitoes, or OXITEC mosquitoes we call them, are produced in the UK. They're also produced in Brazil, for example. So one can send the eggs of these mosquitoes, for example,
by UPS?
Well, actually by air freight. I mean, they have to, one has to do it in a special way. But mosquito eggs are so tiny that you can send over very large numbers in a very small package. Yeah? So we send the mosquito eggs out on a fortnightly basis, something like that, to where they're needed, and those then are taken from the egg stage up to the adult stage. So that's basically hatching those eggs in water, rearing them in water, and then the very last stage is where the what they call the pupae come out, and they in a couple of days they'll turn into adults, and those adults will be released. So that part of the production process would be done here locally, and we would set up, or we would bring in what we call insectaries. So these are little mosquito production units. Actually, they're based on a 40-foot shipping container, and they're fully temperature controlled, and inside they're state-of-the-art mosquito production factories, basically, completely self-contained. And we would bring in a couple of those, potentially a third if necessary, and we would be we would be working with local people here to rear those mosquitoes.
Yes, you did indicate that you'll be working, training.
Yeah.
The team, how big is your team once the government, when the government says, yes, we want to try this method, how big is the team from OXITEC, and how many persons at one stage locally would you be doing training with?
Well, excuse me, the OXITEC would bring a project manager to Anguilla, and he would stay here for a period of 2 years. And additional support staff, for example, in the setup phase, the community engagement and so on, we'd bring other people in on a short-term basis as necessary, sometimes just for a couple of weeks or whatever, but to support in those critical times. Otherwise, the project manager will be working with local people. So we use local people for rearing those mosquitoes, for releasing them, for monitoring, and some of those people we would anticipate coming from the Department of Health, and if we need additional, then we'd hire additional. So in total, it would be a sort of a minimum of 8 people that would be required, and at the more intensive times it might be somewhat more than that.
As we close, and we've been talking about genetically modified mosquitoes, from what I've heard coming out of the conversation, we know that community engagement is very crucial, a vital part of this exercise.
Yes.
What kind of message, positive message, you want to leave with the people of Anguilla as we close regarding this method?
I would just summarize to say that this method is the best possible response that your government could make towards this mosquito threat. And as I said, chikungunya was a wake-up. Zika is not yet recorded here, but the potential, the threat is there. This is a safe technology, and if there will always be people who are concerned that they need more information, and we'll supply that information. So the community engagement, we will supply enough information so that people can have full transparency. This is a safe technology. It has the approval of regulators from several countries around the world. It is fully supported by a special inquiry from the House of Lords in the UK recently. It's supported by mainstream scientific opinion, and it is supported, the adoption of this on a larger scale is supported by World Health Organization. It is a safe technology, and we've got an opportunity to rid the island of this mosquito that'll bring long-term health benefits. We can not only eliminate it, but we can maintain that and keep it out. So I think that there's a real partnership with the government that we'd like to get into here. Health leadership, environmental leadership, and leadership to secure the tourism industry.
Richard Adey, the Regional Manager for the Caribbean for OXITEC. We've been talking tonight about genetically modified mosquitoes, and we look forward to hearing more about this method and the results of your discussions with the government of Anguilla as you continue to promote the genetically modified methods of the mosquito around the Caribbean. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
This has been another edition of Facing the Issues. Join us next week for another program.